Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Danielle Hallen and I am back with part 2 of the disappearance and murder of Evelyn Boswell. Now if you have not seen part 1, I will have that link down below for you to watch before you proceed with this video. In part 1, we take an in-depth look into the disappearance of 15-month-old Evelyn Boswell. Evelyn was not reported as missing until 3 months after she had last been seen by her grandfather on Thanksgiving of 2020. Her mother gave numerous stories as to what had happened to Evelyn, and we take a look into the multiple suspicious interviews she gave to the media in the days following the Amber Alert, and ultimately we get into her arrest. This case is filled with conflicting information, a broken timeline, a whole lot of heartbreak, and in part 2, we will be diving into the unfortunate discovery that was made in March 2020 and the events that followed. So let's go ahead and dive right in. At the time, the public did not know this, but I am looking into this and reporting this way after this happened, so we know it now. But unbeknownst to the public, Megan had told authorities about a week prior to March 6th, so shortly after she was arrested, that Evelyn had died. That none of her stories this entire time had been true, which we already knew, but at this point, people were still kind of questioning Angela. Did she kidnap her? Is she off somewhere? I mean, you have people chasing Angela down as she is leaving jail, asking where Evelyn is. But the reality is that Megan had lied about every single thing. And she knew this entire time that her daughter was dead, and every word coming out of her mouth in all of these interviews was utter bullshit.
I can't tell anything about the ongoing investigation, but I'm sure you all have released an article about the car and stuff like that, so they have a pretty good idea of who has her. I mean, if they're watching, I just want them to bring her back.
Is there anything you'd like to say to them if they're watching?
I just want her back. That's my child.
I'm sorry. I know this must be hard. Do you have any regrets about not involving police sooner? I know that...
Well, sort of, but also in a way, I knew that as soon as anything went down, the person was going to just disappear. And they have. And they've tried to find them. They are going to find them. Mm-hmm. And I know that they'll bring her back to me.
You feel fully confident in that. That's good. But if you could do this all over again, is there anything you would do differently?
Yeah, I probably called the first day. I should have. But I just didn't want them to run with her. Like they have now.
Did you ever...
But she was saying that what did happen to Evelyn, what did cause her death, was not homicidal, it was accidental. Megan claimed that she and her boyfriend, Hunter, coming up again, had been sleeping one night in bed. They were sleeping together, and Evelyn was sleeping in the bed with them. And she claimed that the following morning, she woke up and found that Evelyn had essentially been smothered in her sleep, that one of them had rolled over onto this 15-month-old baby, and she had died. And so I am sure you're thinking, okay, she's finally been caught. She's finally been arrested. She's finally coming forward and telling the truth, but still, this story was not adding up for a plethora of reasons. First and foremost, Hunter was claiming he had never even met Evelyn. So either he's lying about meeting Evelyn, or Megan is lying about what happened to her daughter yet again. And on top of that, Megan was still refusing to really give a specific date that any of this happened, which as a mother, you would remember the date that you may have accidentally rolled over on your child and suffocated them to death. But not just that, she was refusing to tell authorities where the body was. So this entire week, authorities have this information, they're sitting on it, and they could be going and finding Evelyn, getting this little girl, so at least someone that cares about her can lay her to rest, just doing something. But Megan was harboring the information about where Evelyn was, despite being so adamant this was just one big accident. And then ultimately, Tommy Sr. called in yet again and led authorities in the right direction. And now, I don't know if this was just a guess on Tommy Sr.'s part. I don't know if maybe Megan called him and gave him this information. I don't know if he'd had this information the whole time. There's really no answers out there for me to give you. But essentially, Tommy Sr. called in to authorities and said, you know what? I've got a shed on my property. I think you guys should search it because I believe it may contain valuable information. And he claimed that this shed had not been used for years by his family, but again, he just felt like they should go and search it. So that's exactly what authorities did. Authorities arrived at the Muddy Creek property to begin their search, and TBI agent Brian Fraley was the first one to go into this shed that Tommy Sr. indicated may contain some sort of information. And Brian Fraley was able to confirm that most of the shed appeared as if it had not been touched in who knows how long. The entire thing was covered in dust. Everything was covered in cobwebs. But in this shed, and this part almost like makes me sick to my stomach, there was a playhouse in the shed, and it was actually a playhouse built for Megan by Tommy Sr. when she was little. And behind this playhouse, there was a trash can. And this was the one item in the entirety of this building that appeared to have been put there recently. There was not like a specific time frame. He said, it could have been weeks, could have been a few months, which that still would be the time frame in which something may have happened. But it was sticking out like a sore thumb. And so Agent Brian Fraley went over to this trash can, and there were bags piled into the trash can. And the first one that he, picked up, it was clear that it was filled with diapers and toys and just all these items that would have belonged to a child about Evelyn's age. And underneath that bag, sticking out of another trash bag, he saw a little foot. A little foot was sticking out of this freaking trash bag. Now, upon further investigation, it was the body of a child. Now, obviously, full proper identification measures have to be taken, but it was so very obvious what they were looking at. And the outfit that this child was wearing perfectly matched the last outfit it was described that Evelyn was seen wearing. Everyone was broken. I cannot imagine what all of the investigating officers felt, because they had sacrificed like day in and day out their time to try to figure out what happened to this little girl, and they had so much hope that she would be found alive and well. And the state in which she was found, I will get deeper into, but it was so disturbing to see a 15-month-old child in that sort of position and state. And the community that had been on the edge of their seat at this point for months, watching Megan say all these things and make all these claims, and they're all hoping and they're all searching and putting forward rewards and like these vigils and doing everything that they possibly can to know that this little girl was found on the property of the Boswell family was devastating. Even though the identity had not been confirmed, in response, the entire community did what they'd been doing this entire time, and they showed up for Evelyn. They built a memorial near the Muddy Creek home where she was found. There were stuffed animals and candles and pictures and flowers and all sorts of things, and ended up growing so large that they had to move it actually across the street to a church. Because so many people were showing up to show their love and support for Evelyn, the kind of love and support that this little child had always deserved. And on March 11th, the announcement was made that the remains that had been found were in fact those of Evelyn Boswell. And right away, it was also announced that all of the records, the autopsy, everything had been sealed to protect the integrity of the investigation, because while Megan was incarcerated due to giving false information in regards to the disappearance of Evelyn, that does not necessarily mean that she's responsible for whatever may have happened. They had still yet to find enough evidence, enough information to figure out who was responsible. So all of that needed to be held as tight to the vest as possible, because they wanted to be able to get justice for Evelyn. But they did end up bringing Megan back in to have a hearing, and they raised her bond to $150,000 due to the circumstances and the speculation that she could possibly be involved in the death of her daughter. Other family members grieved and attempted to wrap their head around the fact that Evelyn had been on this property the entire entire time. While all of these people were supporting Megan and trying to get answers and fighting for this little girl, she had been right there. They were realizing, the reality of what was happening and of the lies that they had been told, and that all of this hope that they had, Evelyn was not going to come back safe. So a few different family members did make public statements, obviously wanted their privacy. They wanted time to grieve to themselves about the situation and how she felt in regards to her own daughter claiming that she had kidnapped her granddaughter, when in reality, that's not at all what happened. So according to this interview with Angela, she stated that she had not been in communication at all with her daughter, with Megan, since September of that year. And in late December, she ended up hearing through the grapevine, I don't know if Megan told her or someone else, that Evelyn had actually been taken out of Megan's custody and placed in foster care. And I don't know, again, if this is something that Megan was claiming to her mother or if Megan had told the story to someone else. We already know she had been giving people all sorts of stories to explain why Evelyn wasn't around. Maybe this was just one of them. She claimed that at this point, she reached out to Megan to try to help her. She was like, I'm going to come back in your life. I'm going to do what I can for you, do what I can for Evelyn. So she reached out to Megan to try to essentially help her, but she had decided she was not going to bring up the fact that Evelyn had been taken from Megan's custody, because she didn't want to upset her daughter. She wanted Megan to come to her on her own and tell her what was going on. But she said that never actually happened. Angela chalked it up to the fact that she believed Megan was just embarrassed, that she was embarrassed that she had her child taken away from her. But Angela claimed that she really didn't think much of it, that she thought Evelyn was safe somewhere else in foster care, and that Megan was just embarrassed and she didn't want to have to tell her mother what was going on. That is until Tommy Sr. called her on February 17th saying that he was going to report Evelyn as missing. Now, her recollection of this call seems very different from what both Megan and Tommy Sr. have said. She does not at all mention that she threatened Tommy Sr. She basically claims that this was the moment that she learned that Evelyn was not in foster care, that Evelyn had been missing, that Megan didn't know where she was and wasn't bringing her forward, that no one was saying anything. Family members hadn't seen her in months at this point. And so according to Angela, this phone call absolutely blindsided her. She also gave more insight into the following days after Evelyn ended up being reported as missing. Angela ended up kind of answering a bit of the question of where was Megan this whole time? She wasn't living with her dad, or he would have noticed that Evelyn was gone. Angela claims that's because Megan was actually living with Hunter Wood. Again, making me so confused because he says they weren't serious, this, that, and the other, but Angela said Megan was living with him. They were staying in the same house together. And on the 19th, Megan called Angela and said, look, he doesn't want me to be here anymore because of everything that's going on, because of the Amber Alert that's going out. Clearly, Megan could not give him any straight answers either because he kicked her out and she needed help. And so Angela ended up picking her up that day from a gas station and took her to the sheriff's department to go and speak to authorities. And this was the last time that Angela claimed she had any contact with Megan, and Megan has confirmed that in her interviews, that this day, the 19th, was the last time she spoke to her mother. And while that does seem to give us possibilities to answer some of the questions that I feel like majority of us have, it just also adds more questions onto everything, because based on the timeline, it seems that when Angela dropped Megan off on the 19th to go into the police department, this is right before the BOLA was put out. This is, right before this information was introduced that Angela had something to do with Evelyn's disappearance. And so I'm like, how did we get from point A to point B? She's calling her mom asking for help one day, and then the next day she's throwing her mom under the bus, making accusations that she's a kidnapper. When it comes to Angela allegedly fleeing the state and going to North Carolina, and this strange business about William McLeod being wet and them showing up and asking for money to leave the state and all these things, according to Angela, she and William drove to North Carolina the following day after dropping Megan off at the sheriff's department. And she said she did this because she needed to clear her head, that she wasn't getting any straight answers from her daughter, that she couldn't figure out what happened to Evelyn. She was worried. And so she decided to go to North Carolina, where William had family, to take a bit of a breather. And she even states in this interview that she was actually in contact with authorities on the 21st of February, which again, we cannot confirm any of this information she's saying in regards to coming back to Sullivan County to speak to authorities authorities about what was going on. I can't confirm that. Authorities have not come out and confirmed that. But she claims that shortly after speaking to Sullivan County Sheriff's Department, that her dad ended up reaching out to her and saying, hey, that BMW you were gifted, there's a bolo out for it in regards to Evelyn's disappearance. And Hunter Wood's family has reported it as stolen. And so at that point, I guess she just panicked and one thing led to another. She remained adamant that she was not at all involved in whatever happened to Evelyn, and she actually continued to support her daughter despite the fact that her daughter placed the blame on her. Shortly after this interview, there was another interview that was posted by Crime Online with a woman named Christy Broom. So this is the only interview that I've ever seen in regards to this individual, but the information she said is so questionable that I wanted to share it here. So essentially, this answers what happened after Megan was kicked out of Hunter Wood's house. She was not able to go back to her dad's house because her dad's like, you know something about your daughter. Her mom has left to a different state, and so she ended up staying with a woman named Christy Broom. And Christy Broom, I guess, was the mother of one of Megan's childhood friends that had unfortunately passed away back in 2018. But Megan and Christy Broom remained very close-knit. So according to Broom, the entire time that Megan was staying with her, she, for the most part, didn't seem super interested in going out and looking for Evelyn herself, super interested in the investigation just in general. And she seemed to repeatedly state that she was more so worried that she was going to be arrested. And Broom couldn't figure out why on earth Megan would be worried about something like that. In regards to this, Broom said, quote, "There was about 3 days she was with me. I thought that her and I would go downstairs and Megan would just explain what's going on, tell me who had Evelyn, and everything would be okay. That never happened. That did not happen. She kept saying that day, quote, I just feel like I'm going to get arrested, end quote. She said it about 5 times because she knew the investigators were searching on Tommy Sr., her dad's property. I said, quote, why would you say that, Megan, end quote. She said, quote, I just feel like my mom would hurt Evelyn and put her on my dad's property, end quote. Which is a hell of a thing for her to say, Megan said. This is essentially Megan telling someone before she's even been arrested, before Evelyn's body was even found, like 2 weeks before, that she felt like Evelyn was going to be found on her dad's property, but she was still saying that her mom was going to be the one to put her there. And that is exactly where Evelyn was found. And so either it's one hell of a coincidence that she just so happened to guess the exact location her daughter was going to be found, or she already knew she was going to be found there and still wanted to place the blame on someone else. And according to Broom, when Megan was saying this, that her daughter's body was going to be found on her dad's property, she had absolutely no emotion. Like there weren't any tears or sadness for Evelyn. It was more so worry for herself. And Broom allegedly called her out on this and was like, you are saying that your mom possibly killed your child and is going to hide it on your father's property, and you're just like not emotional about that. Now, ultimately, during this initial search of Tommy Sr.'s property, they did not find Evelyn, but they did collect some sort of evidence, and they actually reached out to Megan to come and look at this evidence. And, she was saying in interviews, every chance they, allow me to come up there, I'm up there. But Broom said that when Megan received this call where they were like, look, we found something and we want you to come in and look at this evidence, that she said no. Like, she said she would come the following day, that she was too tired. And Broom remembered thinking this was super strange. It's like, is she worried that they found her daughter and she doesn't want to go up there? Her behavior was just incredibly odd given the circumstances. And Broom said that those first few days when no one heard anything at all from Megan, it's because of whatever was going on with this, of her worry that she was going to be arrested, of her worry about the search of her dad's property, where Evelyn was ultimately found weeks later. She wouldn't call police. She wouldn't talk to police. Broom said that she could not wrap her head around Megan's behavior. And then once that search was done, that's when all of a sudden Megan pops up everywhere. She's doing all the interviews. She's making all these claims. She's on social media. It was almost like a sense of relief, like, oh, they didn't find anything. So now I'm going to tell all this information. Now I'm going to put my face out there. Over the next couple of months, the investigation continued and everyone just kind of patiently waited to see what was going to happen. And ultimately, by August 19th, Megan was facing a total of 19 charges. Things had escalated a lot.
Dead in March following an extensive search. Right now, let's go to authorities in Sullivan County who are giving an update on that case.
Sullivan County Sheriff and TBI Director David Roush. We also want to thank Special Agent in Charge Joseph Carrico with the FBI for being here today and for the FBI's assistance during the search for Evelyn, as well as their support throughout the investigation. Please understand that the information you are about to hear is the extent of what we can provide at this time in order to preserve the integrity of the case. For that reason, we will not be opening the floor to questions once the speakers are finished. General Staubus?
Thank you. Good afternoon. This afternoon, the grand jury of Sullivan County returned a true bill, a presentment, charging Megan Boswell with a total of 19 counts. There were 2 counts of felony murder, one in perpetration of aggravated child abuse and one in perpetration of aggravated child neglect. 1 count of aggravated child abuse, 1 count of aggravated child neglect, 1 count of tampering with evidence, 1 count of 12 counts of false report, 1 count of abuse of corpse, 1 count of failure to report a death under suspicious or unusual or unnatural circumstances. The next hearing date is August the 28th in criminal court for Sullivan County, and the bond on this case currently is $1 million.
Thank you, General Staubus. Baby Evelyn's body was found on March 6th. Since that time, my detectives, TBI agents, and the DA's office have worked tirelessly conducting interviews, combing through evidence, and establishing a timeline in order to determine the circumstances leading to Baby Evelyn's death. As a result of false information given by the defendant, along with misinformation circulated in the community, there's been a lot of confusion in the case. I want to be clear when I say that after an extensive and thorough investigation, other individuals were eliminated as suspects, and Megan Boswell became the sole suspect in this case. My office has received dozens of calls and messages over the last several months from concerned residents wanting to make sure that we had not forgotten about baby Evelyn. I assure you we haven't and we won't. I want to express my sincere appreciation to those residents who have shown their support throughout this process. We've received foods, cards, prayers, many encouragement, and we appreciate that more than you know. I know many of you still have a lot of questions in this case. Please know that we can't speak to the evidence gathered during this investigation because this case now has to be prosecuted. We are determined to make sure that justice is served for baby Evelyn. Thank you. I'll now turn it over to Tennessee Bureau of Investigation Director David Roush.
Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate it. I'd like to thank the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office, the District Attorney's Office, and the FBI for their partnership in this case. This case is yet another example of the excellent collaborative efforts of law enforcement in Upper East Tennessee, and quite frankly, throughout the state. Every single person who worked on this case should be commended. I know it wasn't easy, and it had to be heartbreaking throughout. As we struggle to attempt to understand why or even how someone can harm an innocent child, we will never know, because thank God most of us are not wired that way. But we can certainly try our best to make sure that those responsible for these incomprehensible acts are held accountable. Today's indictment is the first step in assuring that that happens. Our hearts and prayers go out to the family and friends who love baby Evelyn, along with the many citizens who, like us, developed deep-seated love for this sweet little girl. She didn't deserve this. No child does. And that's why we will continue to work to pursue justice in this case. It's the best and most important thing we can do to honor her memory. We now move to the critical role in our system of working with General Staubus's office to engage the courts and provide the proof that so many have worked tirelessly to collect. We are deeply grateful to this team of professionals for the determined and methodical investigation. In closing, we would like to encourage anyone who suspects that a child is being abused to immediately report it. Child abuse must stop, and we must do all we can in our power to make it stop. You can report it to your local law enforcement agency or call the Tennessee Child Abuse Hotline at 1-877-237-0004. Thank you.
They were charging Megan with the death of Evelyn Boswell, her own daughter. Now, in total, 12 of those charges were false reporting charges, which should come as a shock to absolutely nobody. One of them was abuse of a corpse, and that's typically referring to like when someone like moves a body or something along those lines. One of them is tampering with evidence, which is very interesting because I have no idea what she could have possibly done in terms of tampering with evidence. Maybe it goes hand in hand with abuse of a corpse. Maybe they believe that at some point Megan potentially moved Evelyn's body to the shed. One count of failure to report a death under suspicious circumstances. And the 2 counts of felony murder are in regards to felony child abuse and aggravated child neglect. And at this point, they raised her bond all the way up to $1 million. And it wasn't until September of this year, so like 2 years passed, before the cause and manner of death were finally released. This occurred just months ago, and it is so upsetting. So if you do not want to hear any of this information, I suggest you skip ahead to pretty much the very end of this video at this point. So the autopsy was performed at William L. Jenkins Forensic Center in Johnston City by, and I hope I pronounced this right, Dr. Darinka Polchan. And according to this pathologist, Evelyn died of asphyxiation. And I've never heard this before, but it was said that she died of asphyxiation in 4 separate forms or in 4 different places. That's the way that I've seen it described. And it was actually confirmed that Evelyn had gone into this trash can alive. So Evelyn had been found inside of this trash can. She was inside of a trash bag, like upside down into this trash can in a trash bag, and she was wrapped tightly in a fleece blanket. But not just that, her entire face had also been wrapped just as tightly in aluminum foil. And more specifically, it was described that she had been, quote, tightly wound, end quote, in these items, to the point that it flattened out a portion of her face. So those 2 things alone, being wrapped by those 2 separate items, and being in the trash bag, those are 2 of the forms of asphyxiation that led to her death. Another form was just the fact that she was even in a trash can to begin with. She had bags piled on top of her. And not just that, the final way was how exactly she was placed in the trash can. So according to the pathologist, she was pushed into this trash can with such force that it overextended her head backwards. Her head was basically flat, touching her back. It's just absolutely freaking devastating. And unfortunately, there was no way for the autopsy to really determine if there were any other injuries, such as blunt force trauma, due to the level of decomposition. But they were able to pretty confidently say there likely wasn't any, just because there was no other damage noted to the skeleton at all. And interestingly, Dr. Polchan even shut down Megan's claims that this was an accidental death due to being smothered in her sleep, because she said Evelyn was just far too developed to have suffered from some sort of co-sleeping accidental death. This is not a newborn we're talking about. This is a 15-month-old, with the ability to cry and with the ability to have a little bit more strength. But ultimately, this pathologist stated that her belief is the manner of death was homicide. Now, the entire reason that all of this information was even released to begin with is because it was released during a hearing in regards to the upcoming trial, which was supposed to start, I believe, February 6th of 2023. So we'd be less than a month away as of right now, but it was moved. We'll get to that. But essentially, one of the largest issues brought forward in this trial was an argument over what photographs should be shown to the jury in terms of when Evelyn was found, her positioning in the trash can, autopsy photos, all of that. And the pathologist was kind of arguing that all of these photos were absolutely crucial to understanding the kind of state that Evelyn was in and coming to a conclusion of whether this was accidental or homicidal. So basically, Megan's attorney, Brad Sproles, strongly felt that all these photos would basically trigger just an emotional response, a massive one, which yes, it probably would. And at that point, it would prevent the jury from taking all of the evidence into consideration, that it was highly prejudicial to show all of these photos. But again, the pathologist argued that they had to see this to understand what exactly happened to Evelyn.
What's really important for me was to show the placement of the foil and how tightly actually one can see the outline of the head and upper body with the foil being attached. So it's not crumpled foil from somebody, I don't know, barbecuing or doing something and then putting it next to the child. It's actually wrapped around the upper part of the child.
The photos also show indentions on Evelyn's head and body from the foil and blanket and show that her body was in a position the pathologist said wouldn't allow her to breathe. The court did have to take a recess before getting deep into that testimony today because Megan Boswell hadn't seen the photos before today's hearing. She was visibly crying when she walked back into the courtroom this afternoon.
The pictures that we went back and went through are very graphic and just very disturbing. And, you know, she reacted the way I would expect any of us to. You know, it was very upsetting. Unfortunately, I've had the opportunity to look at those pictures over and over again.
The photos weren't the only point of contention today. Court started by Boswell asking for a new attorney. She and Sproles told the judge that they are not on the same page when it comes to this case, and that all came to a head today as he said they weren't able to effectively prepare for this hearing. The judge denied that request, but said that could change depending on how they work together in the future.
It was decided that all of the photos would be admissible in court except for one of them, which was a very close-up shot of Evelyn's face after all of the layers had been taken off. And during this hearing, it was also announced by the prosecution that they would not be seeking the death penalty. Now, Brad Sproles did end up entering a not guilty plea for Megan, and as I stated, the trial was supposed to occur on February 6, 2023. However, things have changed because it does not seem like Megan's attorney, Brad Sproles, was really doing much for her. I've watched all of his different interviews. Regardless of your opinions on this case, and if you feel Megan is guilty or not guilty, it is our right as a people to a fair trial. And honestly, her attorney was just not doing a great job. The whole vibe that I got from him listening to every single one of his interviews was just this overwhelming feeling of nonchalance. Like, he just seemed almost like he had made his mind up that she was guilty. That's just the way that it came across to me. He even giggled and said that he wouldn't comment when asked if he was surprised that her felony murder charges were added on. So their relationship was not doing very well, and I just don't think he would have provided her with any sort of adequate defense, which again, that is just something we have a legal right to. So she ultimately ended up asking for a new court-appointed attorney, and during this hearing, he also did not disagree with her. He clearly did not want to represent her either, and he filed to be removed as her attorney. They basically said they could not get on the same page, that they were having a hard time even preparing for these hearings leading up to the trial, and Brad Sproles said he wasn't sure how he would even be able to handle the trial based on the way that they were getting along at that point. And she expressed concerns that they were not on the same page when it came to witnesses. Initially, the judge denied this, said that he would not be allowing her to get a new court-appointed attorney. But by October, so within a month, Brad Sproles did in fact end up stepping down as her attorney, and she had a new appointed attorney, Jean Scott. Jean Scott seems to have hit the ground running in terms of her defense, so I'm very interested to see what happens at this point, because already he has been filing motions left and right. She is now allowed to wear civilian clothes at all of her hearings, which is important when it comes to the way people perceive her, because he just came on a couple of months ago. He filed for the trial to be moved back to February 3rd, 2025, 2 years, which is a very conflicting situation. This is going to be interesting because the prosecution is now going to have to keep tabs on every single one of their witnesses. There's now going to be a lot more time between when all of this occurred and when the witnesses are going to have to testify. And so it really starts to throw in this idea of, are people even going to really remember things accurately? Is this going to change what people say? Are some witnesses going to decide to back out at this point? Is something going to happen to one of these, crucial witnesses that may totally take the prosecution's case down against her? It just brings a lot of stressors. But on the same hand, there is absolutely no way that this defense attorney, I don't care if you hired the best defense attorney on the face of the planet, there's no way anyone could have put together a defense for this girl in 4 months. There is just not. And so he said that he needs time to be able to go through all of the insane amount of information in this case, which I will say I probably have put more time into this case than any of them so far, because there's so much out there. And that's just to the public, but they have hours and hours of interviews with police, surveillance footage, all the different people that were questioned, over like 600 some leads that authorities all looked into. There is so much to go through. On top of that, I'm sure they need to get expert witnesses and do all sorts of things. And one thing that may drastically change this case is that Gene Scott seems to want to look into Megan's mental health. They want to do a psychiatric evaluation, which I was honestly surprised that was not done off the get-go. I don't know if she didn't want to have it done. I know that Brad Sproles did mention multiple times in interviews over the years that he was her attorney. There was this opportunity to have a psychiatric evaluation done to see if there was something else going on based on Megan's behavior and all of these things, but he never actually did it from my understanding. But that seems to be one of the largest things that Gene Scott wants to look into. So since this all just kind of occurred a few months ago, I'm curious to know if she's actually already gone in for a psychiatric evaluation, if she's going to, what the outcome of that's going to be. Honestly, I feel like there's going to be so much that changes in the next 2 years just due to her change in attorney alone. So we will see. But I will say that I am a little devastated that we are now going to have to wait 2 more years for a trial, because it felt so close to answers. There are just so many questions in this case that have been there since the very beginning. And watching this all unfold over the past 2 years and feeling so close to maybe having some sort of understanding as to how on earth this can happen, having that kind of pulled out from underneath us and having to wait 2 years, while it's for good reason, it just kind of sucks, because I want to know, why did this happen? Could it have been prevented? Did other people know? It sucks to have to wait to see if there will ultimately be justice for Evelyn. But the one good thing that did come from this that we will not have to wait for, and that hopefully will help prevent something like this from ever happening again, was the signing of Evelyn's law. So April 16th, 2021, Governor Bill Lee signed Evelyn's law. And this does in fact require parents to report a child 12 and under missing in 24 hours, or they face misdemeanor charges. Now, we've already seen the benefit that this can provide thanks to Kaylee's law, which is in most states in some way, shape, or form. But this law definitely could help prevent situations like this from happening again. Even in North Carolina with the Madalena Kojikari case, North Carolina is one of the states that has Kaylee's law. And Madalena Kojikari's parents were arrested within a few days because they failed to report her missing for months. Now, while that unfortunately probably isn't going to change the path of whatever happened and get back any evidence or anything of the sort, it at least is hopefully sending a message to parents that you will be incarcerated for this. You will face consequences if you do not take your obligation as a parent or a guardian seriously and help your child if they are in need. There have also been a handful of other really great things that have come out of this as well. There is something known as Evelyn's Army. They were actually one of those Facebook groups that did a lot of good for Evelyn in her case, and they have continued to do that. It mainly consists of local mothers. I think they also were the ones behind starting the memorial for Evelyn after her remains were found. But they basically started out as a group of mothers that were trying to fight for Evelyn, that were trying to help locate her, help spread awareness awareness. And then once she was found, they ultimately shifted their focus to helping other young children in whatever way that they could. They kind of found this passion that was sparked from Evelyn to help others in need. So they currently create comfort bags specifically for children in domestic violence situations. They fill these bags with things like stuffed animals, crayons, any sort of needs the child may have, coloring books, pretty much anything to provide some sort of peace and calming and relief to these young children that are going through something that is incredibly traumatic. So they create these bags and give them to the sheriff's department, and the sheriff's department is able to hand these bags out as needed. And I do want to state that if you are local to the area, they do take donations. I will make sure to link everything possible down below so you can check that out. I'm sure there's a way that you could possibly send donations in as well. Also raised hundreds of dollars to help provide meals to the sheriff's department and other investigating agencies that had been actively investigating the disappearance and death of Evelyn Boswell. So they have provided a whole lot to the community, a whole lot to the investigating agencies, and it will never get old seeing something like this that is so incredibly helpful and beautiful come out of something so tragic. There's still a giant community behind Evelyn Boswell that is making sure that she is remembered, that she is loved, that people don't forget that there is still no justice for her. And I have no doubt in my mind that this sort of energy will continue over the next 2 years until the trial finally begins. I will make sure to keep my eye on this case for any new developments and pass them along to you guys as soon as I have them. But until then, we are all stuck waiting until February 2025 to see what unfolds then. Predicting that it will take about 4 weeks for the trial, including the jury selection. I strongly feel like they're probably going to try to move it to a different county at the very least, just because this was so widely known by so many community members. That is all that I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to little Evelyn's story. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below to become a part of the Howland fam so that we can hopefully bring them home together or bring them justice together. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.